And we are the Coalition, loud and proud, outrage-born free, civilly disobedient media, broadcasting live on the worldwide Coalition Radio Network. Well, here at the brand new studios of the Coalition Radio Network at coalitionradionetwork.com. Facebook.com/The Coalition Radio, on the mighty Twitter at Coalition_radio, and of course the mothership at coalitionradio.us, where you can find links to our YouTube page, our Spreaker, our Spotify, just about every which way you'd want to hear, to have an opportunity to learn, listen, and speak, communicate with what we call third rail radio here in La Prave, the Naked City, the city of, well, thousands of stories. It's a quiet morning. You know, we're usually here in the studio in the afternoon into the evening. We're starting to schedule guests here in the morning, and as we evolve into a full performing schedule. So if you're joining us now or you're listening via podcast or YouTube, we're grateful you took the opportunity to join us this morning. Joining me live is someone that I like to refer to as a repeat offender. She's joined us several times, both in the Coalition, what we call 3.0, back when we were at the Go Local Live Network, is Melissa Jenkins. She is an activist. Literally, her touch can be felt throughout the city of Cranston, across the state, and over a variety of social justice issues. Melissa, welcome back to the Coalition.
Good morning, Pat. Thanks for having me.
So, you know, the last time we saw each other was actually at the initial meeting of the Rhode Island Co-op, which took place in Pawtucket. It seems like just a few short months ago. So much has happened. So much has changed in the state. Tell us a little bit about what we used to call the Cranston Action Network. We now call it the Collective Action Network. Tell us what's going on with that, its evolution, its growth. We'll do this sort of pre-COVID, during COVID kind of a interface. So give us sort of the backstory of where we're at now.
Sure. Yeah, the Cranston Action Network started right after the 2016 election. We noticed, not only changes with the election at the national level, but in our own city, we saw a political power come into office that concerned us. And especially with the national election, we felt like we really needed to organize as Cranston residents to make sure that the national policies that frightened us did not come to pass in our city. So we organized locally, thinking that we would be a very hyper-local organization that just worked with our city council and with our mayor to make sure that people's basic rights were not eroded under the new administration. And we did that very effectively, but one thing that happened unexpectedly was that we began to partner with other activist organizations on municipal issues. So we partnered, for example, with the Rhode Island Coalition Against Gun Violence when gun violence became an issue in Cranston city government. And we learned from that we needed a larger activism network and communication structure. So out of that, the Collective Action Network was born. And we expanded beyond Cranston to include other municipal action networks and other issues-based activist networks. So now we have a communication network that helps local groups, the Cranston Action Network, the North Kingstown Action Network, Narragansett Action Network, Engage North Smithfield is another group. There's an Engage Barrington group that's starting. So there are a lot of local municipal action networks that are all independently run with their own leadership who can communicate between themselves, and share resources and ideas and strategies, and also communicate with issues-based activism groups where we have aligning interests and where we can cooperate and share resources. So we have a big communication highway now where activist groups can work together and help each other to create the change that we want to see in our communities. So it's been a very long evolution over the past, 3.5 years to become a statewide activist network. And we've done a lot of really amazing things. and connected a lot of people to do great things. But right now, we're in lockdown mode and a crisis is upon us. So right now, what I'm asking activist groups to do is to practice responsible activism. When things were calm, it was a really good idea to organize 40 or 100 or 200 people to call the governor's office about a particular issue because we wanted to bring attention to the issue and make sure that action ensued. Right now, that is a terrible idea because they are at, in crisis mode and working around the clock without sleep to respond to the coronavirus crisis. Mm-hmm. So I've been asking all of the activist networks, anyone that I come in contact with, to please be responsible about your activism, not to say what you have to say or what to do, what you need to do to address your issue, but to do that in a responsible way that's not pulling resources from where they're critically needed. We're in survival mode right now. This is a health crisis that's affecting everybody in the state. And it's not the time to be imposing your issue on the critically necessary resources, unless there's no other way to address that, unless you have an issue that they're really unaware of, please don't be calling on your elected officials en masse for that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. Sure, get your 40 or 100 or 200 people to sign a petition and deliver that once, or go through a local leader. Your city council representative can represent your issues to other elected officials, or your neighborhood association president. The Collective Action Network. We can represent an interest. If you're gonna, organize an action, just do it responsibly. I think a great example, we just had the Never Again is Now group is addressing a really urgent issue in the corona times. Mm-hmm. The ICE detention facility in Central Falls, the Wyatt detention facility, who is holding people who have violated immigration laws, are being held in a collective living situation, which is extremely dangerous right now. And so they organized a drive-through protest where people did not get out of their cars. That's very responsible. It's a very urgent issue. I really applaud their effort. You have to balance the importance of your issue and the way that you address your issue with what's going on right now and just the urgent and critical need for everybody to stay at home. So, yes, make your point, especially if it's an urgent issue. But for the most part, respect the totality of the situation.
Now, when we first met, it had to do with, essentially criminalizing poverty in Cranston. You had a mayor who was hell-bent on putting up local law that would, for lack of a better term, if folks were attempting to, they use the term panhandling. I'm just going to say, ask for alms, if you will. But folks, that was at the time seen, rightfully so, as a needless restriction on people's First Amendment rights, as well as, quite frankly, criminalizing the visibly poor. It evolved politically because of the rapid changes that took place in the immediate wake of the Trump election. Going into Corona, what were your priorities, or what had your plans been for the legislative year? Where were you going to be active in I'll call it a normal world?
In a normal world, my highest priority was actually in the area of municipal hiring, feeling like municipal governments need to embrace diversity in their hiring practices and stop using the I know a guy system of hiring. That is something that has been a huge problem in our state, and it's contributed to the economic and social disparities that we have. So I was very much focused on addressing the economic disparities and starting with municipal hiring, because that is public money. That is our tax dollars at work. Everybody's paying into that, and only some people are benefiting from that. So when you look at hiring, for city halls, for police forces, for firefighters, we need to make sure that those are fair hiring practices. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that they are.
No,
so we were really focused on addressing that issue. We're not doing that now. We'll do that eventually. But right now, we need to survive.
Right.
We're using our communication network really to relay information from the governor, from the daily briefings, to our membership, and to have them in turn relay that to their network to make sure that everybody has the information that they need, not only to stay healthy themselves, but to help their neighbors and their networks to make sure that all of their basic needs are met. So we're sharing information about mutual aid, about charitable organizations that are doing, just meeting the basic needs of people in the community right now. This is survival mode.
Right. We, it's unfortunate in one respect that particularly the city of Cranston had come under fire for its hiring practices because, quite frankly, in a crisis, it's my contention that a more representative base of first providers, if you will, first responders, folks within the governmental bureaucracy, if you will, that were more representative of the communities, the variety of communities in a city like Cranston, you would actually have better communication and better direct reach into those communities. I bring to your attention conversation we had, and that who we interviewed on the air, Anise Germain. You had a situation there where you had the ideal candidate for Cranston Board of Education to fill an open slot, someone who had been an activist, someone who was committed, had children in the system, really, literally a laundry, the perfect candidate. And by the way, she happened to be representative of a minority community, if you will. And if she was on the school board today, I will tell you that it's my experience that she would have had more direct inroads into people in her community so that she could be a direct link from the school board into advocating for this online learning and the rapid changes we've had to absorb relative to how children are taught. And that's where the tragedy is, because it's that institutional knowledge of a community that's so important when you are running a community. You don't get to do it from 100-yard remote distance, and you in a sense now you've got people projecting needs into that community. And I don't doubt for a moment that she is very, very much involved. I could just know in what's going on. But it's to your point, it's different. It's just not the same. That's why the community
it is different.
It needs to reflect the mosaic of what a city of Cranston is like.
Right, representation matters, and I don't think, as hard as we try to educate ourselves about every community and what they need, I don't think we can ever be as knowledgeable as people who truly represent that section of the community in lived experience. So it's I can't emphasize how important it is to cultivate diversity in all of our municipal decision-making entities. Wherever there's a table, everybody should have a seat at that table and to feel represented there. How many Cranston City Council meetings I went to and looked at 9 white men making the decisions that affected the entire community and just feeling completely unrepresented myself. And I know that everybody feels that way when they look at their council, their school board, the firefighting force, the police force, the city hall employees. We had one city hall employee in Cranston who spoke Spanish. In a city where 20% perhaps of the population speaks Spanish, that is unacceptable. And in our response to a public health crisis, how are we communicating with that section of our community? We're not. So when I look back at that, the situation that you brought up with the Cranston School Board, this was a resignation, and the school board had a chance to appoint anyone that they wanted to. They had many qualified candidates to choose from. Let's say they're all equally qualified, even, which is generous. And they did not appoint a Black woman who volunteered.
Right.
And they have none.
It would have been so simple.
I cannot even wrap my head around it.
Right. So
it's such a missed opportunity.
Right. And I want to stress this issue because in a moment of crisis, there's a connection between community and government. And I'm not a big government guy, so it pains me to say this, but there is a direct connection, and your ability to respond to a crisis of this magnitude is a reflection of what kind of communication you have within different subgroup, different groups of people. It could be on a number of different levels. But when you had such a slam dunk moment,
it's not just communication; it's participation. The government is us, but when it doesn't represent us, it's not us. The government needs to be us. We are the government. We make up the government, and it needs to be representative of all of us. And right now it's not. It's not representative of women. It's not representative of people of color. And so when we look at meeting their needs, even in normal situations, they're not.
Right.
They're not. And that's why that was our top priority going in. And it will be again. It absolutely will. But right now, we're not advocating for anything except survival.
Right.
So getting people's basic needs met, making sure that they are protected, kept healthy, return to health if they get sick, that they have their basic needs met. They're not getting evicted. They're not getting their utilities cut off. That's the level that we're at right now. And that's not the level that we want to be at. It's not the level we were at 3 weeks ago, but that's where we are right now. So that's what our advocacy is for, is just for survival, health, return to health, basic needs, housing, food, the very mental health, keeping each other sane through this is a big task. So, we're open to helping with that. And I'm a psychologist myself in real life. I practice psychology, neuropsychology, and teach at Brown University. And I think, this is an area where everybody needs our help, but especially the people on the front line need our help. The people who are still going to work, the essential workers who are really putting their own lives on the line to do their jobs. They need our help. They need our support. So anything that we can do to support them, to help them, to keep them sane, if you have a neighbor who's a nurse, bake them a casserole, just do whatever you can to help the people in your immediate surroundings right now.
Right. Now, the statistics, now that we're a month or so into the visible part of the crisis, my contention that this crisis actually started somewhere around December, and this bumbled mess of a national response that did or didn't take place has exacerbated the situation greatly. Moving past that, however, what we found is that the statistics are very stark. Folks who are marginalized, folks who are of lesser means, folks who are in the inner core, the urban core of larger cities, are grotesquely disproportionately affected by this crisis on a medical level. It's becoming clearer and clearer that the incidence of death, of serious ramifications, as opposed to other communities, it's the numbers are stark. It's not even close. We're going to be tackling that issue here on the coalition over the next couple of days. Dr. Luis Daniel Munoz has been meeting with community leaders, and he's going to be joining us this evening to talk about how we address some of those issues, how we do, in terms of transportation to testing, the availability of testing, what happens when you've got folks who are uninsured or who are reticent to engage in in medical interventions because of their fear of anything from the absence of health insurance to documentation. All of those play an outsized role in the urban core.
Yes, absolutely. But let's say a couple of things just to make sure that people who are listening know this, that there is no charge for testing.
Right.
So regardless of whether or not you have insurance, if you're sick and you need to be tested, you will be tested and there will not be a charge to you. And they are not asking about immigration status or any such thing to go to one of the testing sites. So if you feel like you need to be tested, call your doctor or healthcare provider, an urgent care clinic, call and get an appointment for the testing.
Right.
Regardless of your health insurance status, regardless of your immigration status. You know, we need to say that very clearly because people need to know that they can get tested, they can get care, and they're going to receive care without being charged for that care.
Right. That's
get tested if you need to.
That's got to be loud and clear. And I know Dr. Munoz is advocating increasing the presence of community health centers throughout the state, particularly in areas that are economically challenged, economically diverse, just because of that. Because again, once again, you see in the absence of, in the presence of just a sort of this messy amalgamation of healthcare approaches, you see now across a large scale what that can do when you've got a situation like a pandemic that's viral, that's communicable by air. Listen, we're all stretched thin on the necessary tools on a daily basis to maintain a hyper clean environment from this viral transmission. Imagine what it's like if you can't go to 20 different stores or go online to Amazon Fresh or whatever and just pop in a credit card and, when you see all of a sudden some cleaners and things like that online, and you don't have to worry. You're not in a normal week. You and I are shopping for bargains, but right now, we're going to forego that $5 or $10 because it's just easy, and your family's health is at stake, and you're all of a sudden you're not worrying about the coupons or stuff. And if you're in a position where you're financially impaired, you don't have that option or those options. So so again, we see. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I've heard some other issues come up. For example, if you have an EBT card, you cannot get your groceries delivered. You need to shop in person. And if you're quarantined or you're self-isolating because you think you might be sick, or you're quarantined because you know that you are sick, you need somebody to shop for you, and you may not know somebody. Right. You may not have somebody at the ready who can do that for you. And there are a lot of organizations, neighborhood associations in Narragansett. The Lions Club is partnering with Belmont Market and actually doing deliveries for people in that situation, as well as for elderly and compromised people. But there's a mutual aid group in Providence that's doing that. United Way is helping to coordinate deliveries, and food pantries are doing drive-by pickup in some cases. I know that school lunches are being distributed in some communities. So there are many, many networks for basic needs delivery. And I think people need to feel less anxious and know that their needs are going to be met, and there are networks that are taking care of that, and to just be able to reach out and find the network that is providing what they need. And 211 is the easy access point to find your way to a social program or a network that can help meet your needs. Right. So if you have a need that you don't know what to do, reach out to United Way at 211, or go online to your neighborhood association, your city council representative. Reach out to someone. And find a way to get what you need.
And so much of it is community-based. I mean, we all live in neighborhoods, And we all know that in many neighborhoods there are folks who are elderly. And here's the challenge. I mean, it's when you're elderly, and particularly if you're living alone, particularly if you're on a fixed income, you're facing a lot of life-altering issues in normal times. The cost of medicine, all of that, and so and food delivery is a challenge to begin with, and particularly since so many folks now, live far away from elderly. It's up to us to reach out to people in our community and see where they need help, even if it's something as simple as being that person's designated driver for food deliveries. Community is critical at this moment, and community needs to transcend political differences. Whatever the crisis du jour is on Fox or CNN. My father's 97. Fortunately, he's in a very, very stable environment. Quite frankly, he's in one of the best environments of all. He's at a nice assisted living facility where the folks are doing yeoman's work in terms of monitoring employees. They're doing all the right things. They're doing everything they possibly can, and still there's no guarantees. But not a lot of people have those blessings, and so it's up for us to jump in. We cannot, in a situation like this, just assume that someone else is going to take care of those people, because
right, absolutely. And Rhode Island is a really unique place in how interconnected we are. We're not just densely populated, but we know each other. We actually know our neighbors. Mm-hmm. We care about our neighbors. So we do look out for each other. I had a really fun experience a long time ago, but I tell this story a lot because it's so representative of how Rhode Island is. I was bike commuting to work, and I was coming home, and I got a flat tire on my bicycle. And I was only about a mile from my house, and I didn't want to get my hands dirty, so I didn't change the tire on the spot, even though I know how to do that. Mm-hmm. I just walked the bike home, and I figured I'd deal with it tomorrow. In the 1 mile to my house, 7 people stopped and asked me if I was okay, if I needed a ride, how they could help me. And this was in normal times, and I didn't need help. But that's Rhode Island. Everybody is there for everybody else.
Right.
So, right now, we're hunkering down. We're all in our own house, our own community. But there are 6 houses that I can see from my window. So I'm checking in on those 6 houses by phone. If I go to the store, I get what they need. If they go to the store, they get what I need. So we can all do a little bit less, and we can all help each other out. We also have an organized neighborhood association, but not every neighborhood has that. I was really shocked in Cranston when we started the Cranston Action Network. There were no neighborhood associations. And right next door in Providence, every single neighborhood had a neighborhood association that was well organized, well established, and that's such an incredible help to people in the community to have that simple, organized response of neighbors just sharing information and resources in normal times. So, if you're in a neighborhood that doesn't have a neighborhood association, maybe this will illustrate to you why you need one, and you'll start one when this is all over. But I think those are just incredibly valuable, and it's your own neighbors. It's people from the neighborhood who are just stepping up and saying, let's talk to each other. Let's work on issues, because there are issues that affect every neighborhood. And so just a neighborhood association is a wonderful thing to have.
Now, you're being...
And then the neighborhood...
I was going to say, you're being very... you're taking a very reasoned approach really to everything, and I applaud that. And that's actually what we need right now. We don't need folks flying off on the handle. Not your group's always been rational, but we know the folks who are just ready to fly off the handle at every perceived insult and that occupies every side of every part of the political rainbow, if you will. But at the same time,
one thing I'm hearing that really alarms me. Mm-hmm. I hear a lot. Our elected officials are not doing enough. They don't care. The legislature is not even meeting. They don't care. It's not that they don't care. It's that there's absolutely nothing legislatively that helps us to survive right now. Right now, in these 3 weeks, I think every elected official cares. The ones, and they're all working. The ones that I can see are reaching out to their own network of constituents. They're sharing information that will keep people safe. They're collecting knowledge about what people in their community need. And they're going to be using that information to advocate for their communities when the legislature does get back together. But I don't think it's helpful right now for them to meet, and it's probably harmful in terms of distracting us from the unified, simple stream of communication and information that we're getting just to survive. This is crisis mode. This is where we need to just think about staying well, getting well, basic needs. The legislature has a big role to play. They do in determining our budget outcome, our economic recovery, taking care of the aftermath of the coronavirus. They're going to have a lot of work to do. But this is not the time yet.
Folks, if you're just joining us, Melissa Jenkins is on the line. She of the, what we used to know as the Cranston Action Network, which has become more of a statewide umbrella-style organization called the Collective Action Network, working with community groups, neighborhood associations throughout the state to facilitate a reaction not only to the current crisis, but to address a variety of needs in the community. A lot that we've covered in the past. By the way, at 10:30 this morning, Hannah Stern is going to be joining us from the Rhode Island ACLU to talk about privacy in the age of education and Zoom. I don't think you want to miss that. They came out yesterday with a very provocative statement challenging the state to, let's just say up their A game in terms of how they're addressing privacy issues with now a Zoom interface into literally every household in the state. But most of, there must be, as we look at this situation, each political group that's behaving responsibly, while at the same time advocating for, a current sort of static. Let's focus on immediate needs. Let's focus on response. Let's focus on community. I believe a lot of us are taking notes as to what we're going to react post-crisis, and there will be a post-crisis. I'll spare you my rendition of "There's Got to Be a Morning After" from the Poseidon Adventure, one of the worst '70s movies ever made. But there will be a time for reaction. I know in the libertarian world from which I come from, we've been very focused on professional licensing, for example, which may sound incredibly innocuous, incredibly boring, but when you're facing a national health crisis and you've got doctors and nurses coming out of retirement or who may be able to go from one locale to another and simply can't work because of the exhaustive professional licensing rules that surround so many professions, then you realize that government has so many ways of impacting, unfortunately negatively, how we react in times of crisis where rapid response is critical. I know that there's a lot of folks just quietly on the sideline taking notes. What, if from your perspective, waiting till after the dust settles, what will be your, I'll call it COVID acted priority for the day after, the morning after?
Well, if there's one thing that the COVID crisis is teaching us, I think it's how broken our healthcare system was to begin with, that we're not equipped to respond to a crisis, but also we were not equipped to respond to routine medical needs before this happened. And I'm especially concerned about our ability to respond to mental health needs in the wake of this. Once our physical survival is secured, our mental health needs are going to come to the forefront because everybody is traumatized by this. Some more than others. Some are much closer to the problem. Some are going to work every day and fearing for their health. Some have family members in nursing homes or even in hospice care, end-of-life care, and they can't even visit their loved ones. They're at home isolated from their dying parent or their dying child. And it's horrific. It is. Some of us are going to lose people that we love. And the mental health crisis that follows the physical health crisis is going to be immense. And what have we done over the past 20 years? We have gutted our mental health system. There was a shortage of psychologists and psychiatrists in virtually every state before this happened. We weren't meeting people's mental health needs before. So how are we going to step up and meet them now? We're not. We don't have enough workforce. We haven't invested in the training and the infrastructure to provide that for people. So we're really going to have to take a look at that. I mean, beyond, a national licensing program, which I totally agree with you we need. It's ridiculous that I can practice as a psychologist only in Rhode Island when the training requirements are essentially equivalent in all 50 states. Mm-hmm. It's also ridiculous that psychologists who train for 11 years, similar to psychiatry residents, can't prescribe medication in many states. They can in some states. They can in the armed forces. They can on reservations in certain territories. And they're doing it very effectively, but we're not using people to the highest level of their training. And this is in a profession with critical shortages throughout the United States.
Right. And this
so we're wasting resources when we don't have enough.
Yeah, particularly in the wake of the impact of the crisis that we've just gone through with opioids. There's a national trauma that we went through on 9/11, and then there's the national trauma we're going through now. But on its most superficial level, and as if I could put a smile on this, I'm not an expert. I literally play one on the radio. The notion is of 9/11, and as an armchair reader, is that 9/11 was intensely dramatic. But for most people, it was something witnessed from afar. I happen to lose personal friends on 9/11. A building I used to work in ceased to exist. So I was at a slightly different level. And then, of course, there's the folks who were there and who lost family members. I lost friends, but parents perished. But for most of the country, there was a finality to that. We had our period of national mourning. There were some political ramifications in going after the quote-unquote bad guys. That's a whole nother conversation. But for most people, there was, again, a finality. At some point in time, that ended. Here, it's a national impact. It's an unseen killer. I mean, there's no bad guy going to show up with a gun, so you don't know. You literally, it's asymptomatic, as we all know. Our vocabulary, our medical vocabulary now as a nation is exponentially better than it was a month ago. So we're asymptomatic, and then all of a sudden one day we're symptomatic. We don't know where we got it from. We don't know how it came. We don't know the severity of it as it's happening. It's not, say, like a stage 3 or 4 cancer where it's easily assigned some type of, for lack of a better term, value. You've got this amorphous, unknowing, silent killer out there. How as a nation do we deal with the trauma of that? You're a highly accredited mental health expert. How do we deal with that as a nation post, whenever we can decide to say post? We don't even know when it's going to be post-trauma. We can't even make that judgment.
We have no idea what post-trauma looks like, but when we look back at 9/11, I think there are some lessons there. 9/11 was a collective trauma because it was a threat that could affect anyone. It was a random attack as far as, individuals just went to work that morning. They weren't personally targeted. It was an act of terror that personally affected them, though. And a lot of those people never went home.
Right.
And it shook us to the core because it upset our sense of security.
Mm-hmm.
We all have a sense of security that when we go to work in the morning, we're going to go home in about the same health that we went to work in. And we lost that sense of security in 9/11. Everybody was affected by it and feeling like we couldn't feel safe anymore. And we responded as a nation by beefing up our security alert system, our readiness for terrorism, our airport security. So much of our lives changed. And as a libertarian, we lost some privacy. I'm sure that concerns you.
Every day.
Now, in response to this fear, we all changed our behavior, and we've never quite gone back to the innocence that we had before 9/11. And I think we'll see similar themes after the coronavirus, that I don't think we'll ever feel safe from pandemic again. That hopefully our response to this is going to be creating a very robust, all-encompassing healthcare system that especially is ready to deal with mental health issues, that is ready to address the needs of every community, especially the communities with the greatest need. So I hope that we do build those community health centers. I hope that we, learn from this the importance of representative health care, of universal health care, of not tying health care to employment. Because, here we have 200,000 people, and that's staggering. 200,000 people are suddenly unemployed in Rhode Island. And their health insurance, for the most part, is tied to their jobs. And we have a huge threat to our health. I mean, that's like the perfect storm. Right. It's a terrible situation. We do not ever want to be in that situation again. So how are we going to create, brick by brick, a robust healthcare system that covers everybody, that makes sure that everybody has healthcare that is available, affordable, culturally relevant, and appropriate for them, and not tied to employment? Because when you're sick and you can't work, you shouldn't lose your health insurance.
Right. One of the great questions that had arisen almost immediately prior to this was the notion of sick days. How do we as a society allow people people particularly in the service economy, who have the most contact with people? I mean, it's ironic that we were just 2 months ago having this conversation, somewhat nationally. How do we allow folks who are sick, who have the direct dealings with the public, to quite simply recover without infecting everyone? Who knew that 6 degrees of separation would become 6 foot, the 6 foot social distancing? I mean, it's basic. The madness of this situation is that it literally causes us, and we must question everything. And part of that is getting beyond this political divide where moral relativism takes over and rational thought. Where everyone is so busy and intent on blaming people that, quite frankly, conversations just like this one don't seem to be held very often, and they need to be, and without malice or ad hominem attacks.
I think everybody knew that we needed better sick leave policy before this, and Rhode Island actually, within the last few years, just enacted a law that made sick leave mandatory for many employers, not all, depending on their size. But, it is something that we thought we could get gradually, incrementally, and suddenly we realize, oh my gosh, 5 days of sick leave is not nearly enough when you need to quarantine for 14 days.
Right.
So, on an emergent basis, there is a federal sick leave act. So people who need to to quarantine or self-isolate or who are sick do not have to go to work and do have sick leave. So everybody during this crisis has sick leave. But going forward and recovering from this, we've now learned that, oh gosh, everybody does need paid time off, because otherwise they're going to go to work when they're sick, even if they're a server in a restaurant,
Right.
even if they're a healthcare worker. If they can't afford to take time off, they're going to go to work. And that's not what we want.
Right.
So we definitely need to rebuild in a way that is smarter.
One of the more prurient, if you will, symbols of this crisis, and it's funny, but it's not. It's one of those situations where there's a dose of dark humor in it, but it really speaks to community. It speaks to, quite frankly, some mental health issues, people's state of mind. As this has gotten deeper into the woods, the first week there was almost this jovial novelty about it, and every day that we get into it, particularly if you have a couple of bad weather days like the last few days, the sense of humor is whatever existed is long since gone. The notion that neighbors are quote unquote turning in neighbors, the notion that, and I'm sure you've heard this term, the Karens. Again, addressing it not so much as an activist, but someone who is an accomplished individual in the field of mental health. What are your thoughts on neighbors turning in other neighbors, folks then assigning a group of people who feel like they're simply doing the right thing, a pejorative term? What's your sense of all of that? Have you thought about that?
Yeah, it's hard, I think, because we don't want to police our neighbors, but we also have a collective responsibility to make sure that people are following the rules. So there were a lot of people who were slow to understand that we really needed to distance ourselves. They were still gathering. They were still having house parties. They were still, going to the park and playing basketball with 20 teenagers. And, in normal times, that's a great thing. But right now it's not. People really didn't understand. I'm in a running club, and people in my running club were even saying, why do they need to cancel races? I can't understand that. It took a really long time for people to accept that our normal way of life, the things that we've scheduled months in advance, people's weddings, people's family reunions, people's graduations and proms and, all those things that we've been looking forward to and training for and planning for years can't occur right now. It's really hard to interrupt that cycle of planning. And, we all have calendars that are filling up a year in advance.
Right.
And it's really hard to turn on a dime, to adjust to this. This is a huge curveball for people. So I think it took a while for people to really make that 180, to go from normal activity to very little activity. And, and some people are still not quite there. There are people now who are still going to Home Depot and thinking they're going to use the time for a home improvement project that maybe is not really necessary.
Right.
Don't do that. If you don't need to do it right now, don't do it. This is the time to do only what's essential. Buy only what's essential. Don't go buy the new shoes for next year's gala online because you have time at home now. Somebody has to pack those shoes. Somebody has to deliver those shoes. People don't need to go to work to deliver something that you don't need right now. So think about what you need right now. If you need food, order that. If you need, something that's absolutely critical, your medicine or whatnot, by all means order that, but don't order unnecessary things. Don't do unnecessary projects. This is survival mode. Do as little as possible.
Interesting.
No.
But
we do need to keep our sense of humor. I have a good friend who happened to own, and I don't know why she owned these, some 80s unitards, and she and her daughter put them on and played some games and wore roller skates in their house. And I think that's the best thing I've seen throughout the whole crisis. Shout out to Caroline. Have fun at home. Have fun in any way that you can. Be silly. Keep your sense of humor through this, because that's what's going to get us through. And keep your friends and your social networks. Another really great thing that has come out of this, I have heard from so many old friends, people that, I wouldn't necessarily have time for a long conversation with, but now I do.
Right.
And the ones who are calling me up, I love that. That's the greatest thing, to connect in unexpected ways. And we can use this time very productively, I think, to do those things that we've always wanted to do but didn't have time to do.
Hey, I started a radio.
Now we do.
I started a radio station.
Right. And what a great thing to do, because communication is so critical in all times. And, I have to say, the media in Rhode Island has responded to this so amazingly. Mm-hmm. All of the local media outlets, the newspapers, the television stations, the radio networks, the way that they're stepping up and covering this and providing a channel for people to get their questions answered, to be that relayer of information. They're shutting down their own paywalls in times of crisis in that industry, mm-hmm. so that people can access the information that they need. The media outlets in Rhode Island have been absolutely incredible. So I want to really praise all of them and thank them for what they're doing. Just getting the information to people that they need and doing that for very little reward this point in time.
Mm-hmm. I have a
you too, Pat. Thank you for the radio network and the outlet that you provide. This, it's a critical service. It really is.
Well, two reflections. I have on how fortunate we are. We have a Caroline too. She's about 10 months, my grandniece. And at this point, at any one time during the day, there are a handful of adults zooming in to read to her, to do puppet shows for her. We're not quite sure how she's going to react when this is all over. Just as there is an entire nation full of puppers and doggos who are having the time of their lives, although we're hearing reports of dogs actually saying, enough, I've had enough walks today. I'd like to be left alone. but on a serious note, let's reflect for a second before we go. Rhode Island, my daughter lives in Brooklyn, and Brooklyn's a wonderful place. And if you're 20-something, Brooklyn's an amazing place. But New York City is an island unto itself, regardless of what borough you're in. And so there's a tremendous amount of isolation there, where you're surrounded by an enormous amount of people who are undergoing their own isolation. And while you've got the same thing, local news and local coverage, and there's something about Rhode Island where the absence of any degrees of separation, where on a given day you can sit down to dinner or even now online and all of a sudden discover that you're talking to a governor or a state representative or somebody like that, is astonishing, and we take it for granted as Rhode Islanders, the sense of community, the immediacy, the support, the tribal nature of our state. We take that for granted, and it's in moments like this where we need to reflect on that and give it the appreciation it deserves, because the standard, the style of which we live is very different than most of the nation. We are blessed here in Rhode Island, despite all the challenges we face now and what we're going to be facing when we get done. But we have a style of living here that folks who come here are instantly jealous of and wish they could have. So I want to end on that note. And part of that's reflected in all the folks I've met at the Collective Action Network over the last year or two, who are all intimately involved in their community and are not waiting for somebody else to do it, but are taking it upon themselves in the spirit of volunteerism. As they say, doing the right thing when no one is looking. And that's the type of community involvement that needs to be recognized as part of our culture here. It's just something Rhode Islanders do.
Yes.
So
Well, thank you, Pat. And, I think everybody is doing this, and I see everybody stepping up and offering what they have to offer and, helping out and letting other people help them as well. We are so interconnected in Rhode Island, and that is our strength. And I really think we can be an example for the rest of the country because we do this normally. This is normal for Rhode Island to look out for one another. So everybody's stepping up. And this is how history is going to remember the coronavirus. We are establishing a legacy of how we responded to a terrible, unexpected event. And I think we are writing a very good story. We're making a great legacy for Rhode Island. And I'm really proud of the leadership that we've had through this, of Governor Raimondo and Dr. Nicole Alexander Scott, leading us through this with just such calm, steadfast, prepared leadership and straightforward, clear communication. We're very lucky here that we have them, we have each other, we have formal philanthropic efforts, we have the informal networks, we have collective action, we have neighbors, we have friends, we have each other. So we're going to get through this. We're going to be fine.
Excellent. Melissa Jenkins, she of the Collective Action Network, formerly known as the Cranston Action Network, joining us live on the Coalition. Again, thank you so much. You and I are going to stay in touch on this. I'd love to have you in every 3 or 4 weeks or as events dictate, just to provide both your reflections as an activist, but also, as I said, like I said, a highly credited, recognized mental health expert, because both of them are a unique pairing, and it's... Again, there's going to be a point in time when this is going to be done, and we are going to need to do, for lack of a better term, that postmortem. The more, let's just say, the level to which the conversation can be like the one we just had, where there's an irrational expression of thought, and we dial back some of the polarization that's taken place in the body politic, the better off we'll be. We'll learn from this, we'll grow from this, and we will, as we like to say, there will be a morning after.
There will be.
Thanks for joining me, buddy.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Folks, if you're just joining us, stay tuned. We will have this up today in replay mode. And great conversation. Also at 10:30, folks from the Rhode Island American Civil Liberties Union are going to be joining us to talk about another issue, the one that's kind of been talked about at dinner tables, I think, all over Rhode Island, privacy in the age of Zoom. Folks, we're going to take a quick break. Stay tuned. We are the Coalition, loud and proud, outrage porn-free, civilly disobedient media, broadcasting live on the worldwide Coalition Radio Network here at coalitionradionetwork.com, facebook.com/the Coalition Radio, on the mighty Twitter at Coalition_radio, and, of course, the mothership at coalitionradio.us. This and a lot of the media here in the state, whether it be public television, whether it be the great Steve Allquist, whether it be myself, we are all donor and listener supported. We've got a number of great sponsors. Yacht Club Bottling Works. Go down to Centerdale. They'll actually deliver to you or leave a Corona-appropriate setup for pickup. Support businesses locally, please. When we rebuild, we're going to need these folks just like they need us. Stay tuned. We'll be back in just a bit.